It was a very snowy Christmas Eve. Every year, my dad, who is very religious, would force my sister and I to go to midnight mass. When I was younger, the excitement of the next morning always got me through it. But now that I was getting older, the magic of Christmas was starting to fade. My sister, who was still young enough to believe in Santa, was full of energy, which kept me in the Christmas spirit. By the time we got home, I was ready to crash. I took off my stuffy church clothes and jumped into bed. I remember lying there and thinking about how the next time I wake up, it would be to the smell of cinnamon rolls downstairs and hopefully the new PlayStation under the tree. Boy, was I wrong. I remember jolting up in my bed. It was still pitch black. It was obvious to me at that moment that something wasn't right. I didn't want to wake up my dad and ruin his sleep if it was nothing. So against my better judgment, I slowly opened my door and started to walk downstairs. After 2 steps, I heard my little sister say something. A sudden wave of relief swept across my body, and I continued down the stairs. She must be too excited to sleep and looking if Santa had already left her presents. That's when I heard a man's voice, and it was not my dad's. My heart skipped a beat and I froze. My foot was in midair between steps as I strained my ear to try to hear who the hell it was and what they were saying. What I heard next sent shivers down my spine. "Ho ho, have you been naughty or nice this year, young lady?" he said. I didn't know what to do or whose voice that was, but I quietly finished walking down the stairs while listening. "I've been nice," I could hear my little sister say. "Of course you have," he said with a jolly laugh that made my heart pound. Downstairs was dark, illuminated only by the Christmas tree and all of its lights. I peeked around the corner into the living room. What I saw in that moment is burned into my memory. There was a silhouette of a huge man, at least 6.5 feet tall and over 250 pounds, with his hand on my little sister's shoulder. He was wearing a Santa hat, and he seemed to have a large sack in his other hand. "I have something for you since you've been such a good girl." He reached into his sack and pulled out what looked like a shoebox. I had no idea what to do. I was watching this unfold in front of me as if it was a movie, frozen in fear. Suddenly, I realized how cold I felt. I looked to my left to see the front door wide open, with the snowy wind hitting my face. I was so focused on what was happening that I didn't even realize it was open, or that it was so cold. I looked back to the living room and saw my sister beginning to open up the box. "Is that what I asked for in my letter, Santa?" my sister asked in an excited voice. "Yes, of course," the man replied. In that moment, I worked up all the courage I could and yelled at the top of my lungs, "Hey, get away from my sister." My voice was shaky when it came out. His head whipped around towards me. My instincts told me to run out the front door, but I knew I couldn't leave my sister. That's when I heard my dad's bedroom door fly open and my dad yelled out, "What's going on?" I could hear his loud footsteps making his way to the stairs. The man immediately ran towards me. Adrenaline pumped through my veins and my heart felt like it was going to explode. Just as the man was almost right in front of me, he dashed past me out the front door, slamming it behind him. That's when my dad made it to the bottom of the stairs and looked at both of us with panicked eyes. The silence was deafening. My sister began to cry. My dad ran towards the window to look out, only to see nothing but the blizzard. Needless to say, none of us got any sleep the rest of the night. I still don't know who that was or what was in that box, but I sure as hell didn't want to find out. Most people couldn't tell you what day was the worst of their lives. Unfortunately, I don't have that luxury. It was Christmas Eve 2004. I was just finishing up a Christmas Eve celebration at my grandma's house. My grandma lived in the South, where there's not a lot going on. My family and I hadn't visited my grandma for Christmas since I was in elementary school, so I was looking forward to getting back to the nostalgia of going to her house for Christmas. My parents rented a room at this scuzzy motel a couple miles from our house, since that was all we could afford, and my grandma's house was too small for all of us to stay in. Anyways, we had just finished up Christmas Eve dinner, and I was feeling really tired, so I told my little brother that I was going to walk back to the hotel. My mom was having such a great time seeing my grandma that I didn't want to make her leave early to drive me. I went over to my mom's purse and fished out the rusty key to the hotel room. It was cold out, so I put my hoodie on and walked out the back door. I remember being excited to be out on my own, exploring like I was the main character of a movie. There weren't many houses, or anything for that matter, between my grandma's house and the motel. I honestly don't even know why I was so confident that I could find my way to the motel, since I had only driven between the two places one time. It was getting kinda dark by the time I left, and the only thing guiding my way was the almost full moon above me. After a few minutes, I saw a house in the distance with Christmas lights, but other than that, there wasn't much out there. After what felt like 30 minutes of walking, I began to hear what sounded like singing in the distance, over the sound of the wind. As I kept walking, I could hear it getting clearer. It was a Christmas hymn being sung by what sounded like a large group. This put a smile on my face, and I started to hum along. At that moment, I felt overwhelmed with the spirit of Christmas. A minute later, I began to see where the music was coming from. It was an old white church. The windows had a warm glow, and a spotlight was lighting up a cross on the steeple. The music was beautiful. It still gives me chills thinking about the sound of the organ with all of the voices singing. I stopped on the road, outside of the church, and just stood there, taking it all in for a minute and singing along when I knew the words. At this point, it was getting really cold, so I thought that maybe I should go join them for the rest of their service and warm myself up. I made my way up the steps and reached out my hand to grab the ornate brass door handle. The warmth hit me immediately as I stepped into the church. It felt so nice. The inside of the building was definitely run down, but it was still nicely decorated and festive for Christmas time. I looked towards the packed church benches for a spot to sit down. An old couple turned around and looked at me with big smiles and beckoned me over with a nice wave. They scooted over to make a small spot for me, and I quickly sat down, trying not to make a scene. The church sang 2 more songs before the service was over. I was really glad I joined, and I was feeling much better. As I stood up to leave, the old lady grabbed my arm. "Do you need a ride home?" she asked. "No, I'm fine, thank you," I said. Her hand was still on my arm. "We live just down the street. It would be so great if you came over and had a Christmas cookie and some hot cocoa." That offer did sound pretty good in that moment, and she seemed to be such a sweet old lady, and I felt bad saying no, so I agreed. Her husband stood up and smiled while he dug in his pocket for his car keys. As we walked out, the church bell rung as everyone was saying Merry Christmas to each other and hugging goodbye. It truly felt like Christmas. We got to their car, rather slowly I might add, and I got in the back seat. Within a minute, we were pulling up to a small house. Once we made it to the door, the old man fumbled with his keys for an uncomfortably long time. He finally opened the door, and a disgusting stench filled my nostrils as we stepped inside. I just assumed their sense of smell had faded with age and sat down at the kitchen table, where the old lady pulled out a chair for me. "Let me go get started on that cocoa, honey," she said, as she left through saloon-style doors to the kitchen. As I sat there waiting, I looked around the house. It was your typical old couple's home, with trinkets and photos all around the walls and tables. The old man had sat down on the living room couch next to the kitchen and was staring at the TV. It was taking longer than I thought it would, and I began to worry that my family would get back to the motel and I wouldn't be there. I spoke up and said, "Sorry, I need to get going soon. Is it almost ready?" At that moment, the old lady burst through the doors. It startled me and I recoiled in my chair. She had a big smile on her face, holding a plate of decorated Christmas cookies and a big mug of hot cocoa with marshmallows on top. "Oh, wow, thank you so much," I said, feeling dumb for being startled. I started to worry about the food not tasting good because of their sense of smell. She was staring at me, as though waiting to see me eat what she had just prepared. I nervously took a bite of the cookie and drank the cocoa. Thankfully, it was delicious. As I finished the treats, I told her how good it was and thanked her for being so kind and inviting me to her house. She smiled and nodded along to what I was telling her. She then said, and I'll never forget these words, "Just stay here the night? Just stay here the night. Just stay here the night. You can just stay here the night." The way she spoke when she said those words was extremely unsettling. Thinking quickly, I asked if I could use the restroom. She paused and looked like she didn't want to answer. After what felt like an eternity, she pointed to a door down a hallway. I got up and started walking slowly, trying not to give away how unsettled I was. As I made my way down the hall, I walked past a door that smelled like something died in there. It was undoubtedly where the smell was coming from. As I turned to go into the bathroom, out of the corner of my eye, I saw both the old lady and man standing at the end of the hallway, watching me. I shut the bathroom door and locked it. The first thing I did was look for a window. Thankfully, there was one. I then dug in my jean pockets and pulled out my cell phone. It was almost dead. I called my mom. I felt my heart drop more and more with each ring of the cell phone. Then, my phone died. That's when I heard someone outside the bathroom door. The handle began to move. I went into full panic mode and lunged towards the window and unlatched the lock. I lifted the window and jumped through. I stumbled upon hitting the ground and took off, running faster than I ever had before. I made it to the front of the house and then to the road. After about a minute of running, I saw my shadow on the road. Headlights had appeared behind me and the car sounded close. My worst fear had become reality. They got in their car and were chasing me. The engine was growing louder and louder, and I had nowhere to hide. Just when it sounded like I was about to get run over, the car came to a screeching halt. I turned around, blinded by the headlights. That's when I heard the window roll down and a voice yelled out. It was my mom! "What in the hell are you doing?" she screamed. I was never so happy to hear her say that. I'll never know what would have happened if I had not escaped out of that bathroom window. I remember waking up around 1 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Since we were on Christmas break, my best friend slept over. We stayed up all night playing video games like Call of Duty and Leisure Suit Larry while talking about what girls we had crushes on at school. You know, typical teenage boy stuff. When we came downstairs for breakfast, my mom was not happy at all. She told me I was late for our annual family trip to the mall to get pictures with Santa. I had totally forgotten about it since at this age I honestly was embarrassed to go. I ran upstairs to change clothes while my friend made fun of me, asking me if I had a letter written for old Saint Nick. We both raced downstairs to the car and squeezed into the back seat with my little sister. The car ride felt long thanks to my sister incessantly singing Christmas songs the whole way there. When we arrived, we drove into the parking garage. Every level was filled with cars, and we couldn't find a spot easily until one of the top floors. As we got out of the car and made our way towards the entrance, I heard a car alarm go off. It was so loud, my ears were ringing with the sound. As I turned my head to see what was going on, I caught a glimpse of someone large holding what seemed to be decorative fabric running around the corner. My mom didn't seem to care and kept walking. As she opened the entrance door, I was transported into a Christmas wonderland. The mall was covered with decorations. Christmas music was playing. Families were running around getting their last-minute gifts taken care of, and the sweet smell of hot cocoa filled the air. Of course, the first thing we all wanted to do was grab a cup of cocoa. Wouldn't you do the same? My friend and I split up with my mom and sister, and we all walked around window shopping while we drank. When I had almost finished my cup, my mom texted me that we needed to start heading towards where the Santa pictures were taken. My friend and I made our way through the busy crowd and pressed the button for the elevator. After a minute, the elevator doors opened and two hot girls walked out. My best friend elbowed me as if I wasn't already staring at them. I thought one of the girls looked at me for a second, but maybe I was just dreaming. My buddy turned to me and said, "Have fun with Santa Claus. I'm about to go get on the naughty list," like he was in a Marvel movie or something. I was fuming at this point. Going into the elevator was the last thing I wanted to do, but I knew my mom would kill me if I didn't. I walked into the empty elevator and turned around to press the button. I could still smell their perfumes as I saw my buddy running off through the crowd as the doors started to close. Just before they were fully shut, a white-gloved hand thrust in between them. They slowly opened and a large man dressed as Santa stepped in next to me. I guess I wasn't the only one running late that day. I was surprised that I didn't recognize his face. Ever since I was a little kid, it had always been the same man playing Santa. Despite the fact I didn't want to be here, I couldn't help but feel a little sad that it wasn't the same guy I grew up with. "Let me guess, level 5 for the Santa pictures?" I said with a laugh. He gave a jolly ho 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 and nodded his head. I chuckled and then asked him if he knew what happened to the old Santa. "He died," the man said in a serious tone. Not knowing how to respond to that, I just stood there in awkward silence. The only noise for the rest of the ride was the beeps of the elevator on each floor. When the door opened, I quickly stepped out. I was happy to get out of there. I walked quickly through the crowds to the spot where they always have the North Pole photo area. I joined my mom and little sister, who were second in line. Shortly after, Santa showed up saying ho 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 and took his seat. The little girl ahead of us was so excited and ran up to him. "Come here, little girl," he said. He picked her up and put her on his lap. I turned to my sister and saw her excitement, which made me smile. I turned back to see Santa whispering something into the little girl's ear. She looked confused and whispered something back to him. The look on his face as she did this made me surprisingly uncomfortable. Then, the lady dressed as an elf took their photo, and she got off his lap and walked to her mom. It was now our turn. My mom told my little sister to go first by herself before doing our family photo together. I watched as my little sister walked over to him and got on his lap. Again, he started to whisper. This really made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I didn't want her alone with him, so I decided to walk over and stand next to them early. As I got closer, I began to hear what my sister was saying. She was just finishing telling him our address. Without even thinking, I blurted out, "What the f... Don't give him our address. Why are you giving him our address? I asked frantically. So I can deliver her presents, of course. Ho ho, he replied. This did not seem normal to me at all, and that's when the real Santa showed up. I immediately recognized him as the Santa we've always gotten our photos with, even without the costume. He was red in the face as he pointed at the man who still had my sister still on his lap. That's when all hell broke loose. The fake Santa leapt up, pushing my little sister to the ground. Before I could even process what was happening, he took off running. I picked up my crying sister and looked over at my mom, who was in complete shock. All while the real Santa just kept saying he stole my suit over and over again. Santa honestly sounded like a complete moron during this, but I understand given the situation. I told my mom to call the police, but she said she didn't want to bother them on Christmas Eve. I took out my phone and called my friend. I told him we needed to leave immediately and to meet me at the car. The walk to the car was bizarre. I felt stunned, passing by everyone else enjoying the holiday. When we got to the car, my friend was so pissed at me for making him leave early. He said I ruined his chances to get some. I told him to shut up and explained what had just happened. He understood, but I could tell he was still upset. When we got home, my friend had his parents come pick him up since the mood was ruined. I remember lying in my bed that night, worrying. My sister told this man where we lived. I just kept telling myself that maybe he had forgotten it in all of the craziness. That night was long. Every bump or creak in the house made me alert. For the first time, I was hoping Santa wouldn't visit us for Christmas. Thankfully, he never showed up. But every Christmas Eve, I still think about it.